Will not be the case. I would like to speak probably for about 10 minutes if I could, and thank you for allowing me to do so.
The senator is recognized.
Mr. President, tonight the President is going to address an issue that I know almost every American has been focused on, and that is the rise of ISIS in Iraq and Syria and the beginnings of that in many other places around the world. Mr. President, this is obviously a big speech. It's one that I know all of us will be paying attention to and watching, and I'm hopeful that what the President will do tonight is, first of all, explain to the American people from his perspective what our national interest is in ISIS. I think that should be very easy to do. And I hope also what he will do is lay out a general strategy. Obviously, in a speech like this, you would never want to give every detail of what it is that you want to do, but then lay out the objectives that he wishes to accomplish as he talks to the nation and really the world about how he plans to deal with ISIS. So I want to say on the onset that I look forward to listening. I hope this is a speech that is meaty. I hope it's a speech that speaks to the essence of why we as a nation need to deal with the threat that ISIS poses, not only in the Middle East, but over time the West, with us being the greatest symbol of the West. I know that there have been many conversations with the administration about ISIS. I know that obviously their concern about ISIS has risen over time, and again, I look forward to very clearly listening to the speech. Now, Mr. President, I think that most of us here in the United States Senate, if we were in the White House, might choose to guard the authorities that we have, and many presidents have said, most presidents have said, that they have the authority themselves to conduct operations of this nature. And while that's debatable, that's not a topic that I wish to debate. I know the President has said that he has the ability to go about these actions, take these actions without any additional authority from Congress, and what they have said is that they plan to not come to Congress. And I just want to say, Mr. President, I think that is absolutely preposterous. If you think back in history, back in 1991, President Bush 41, and getting ready to undertake the activities in Desert Storm, felt like he had the authority to move ahead with those activities, and yet they realized within the administration the best thing that they could do is to get the American people behind what they were doing, and the best way to do that was to seek an authorization from Congress to have that debated, to have members of the Senate to be able to ask questions about how this operation was going to take place, to get people comfortable with what the objectives were going to be, and to finally win over the United States Senate. As a matter of fact, as I understand it, the chairman of the Armed Services Committee at the time, Sam Nunn, was opposed to this effort. And yet with Bush 41 coming up with his cabinet members to talk to members of Congress, they were able to pass it over the objection of the chairman of the Armed Services Committee. But what that meant was there had to be interaction, there had to be questions answered, there had to be a feeling by members of this body that what was getting ready to happen was something that was going to make a difference. And so they came and did that. They were successful, and the operation itself was successful. President Bush 43 did the same thing. In 2001, after what happened with the 10 Twin Towers and other activities around 9/11, the country was outraged, and he actually sent forth his own AUMF, the authorization for the use of military force, and action was taken. It was 60 words, it was broad, but action was taken. And then the same thing occurred in 2002, which led up to what happened in Iraq. And so President Bush 43 did those same things, even though he felt like he had the authority himself to take on these activities without Congress approving it. But they felt like it was much better for the American people to see what was going to happen, for Congress to be fully informed, to understand what the objectives were, and then to have Congress authorize. And then this president, President Obama, came before us last year, almost 1 year ago exactly, and asked for an authorization on Syria. So, Mr. President, I find it truly preposterous and hugely lacking in judgment that this president is discussing, and hopefully he will change his mind in the next few days, is discussing undertaking activities in Iraq. Remember, the president declared that in 2011 the war in Iraq was over, that we had won, that it was a stable country, and yet this new enemy, and I don't want to get into the past too much, but because of policies of this administration in both Iraq and Syria, things have changed. So now we have a new enemy, ISIS, which has arisen in this country, an incredibly well-funded, well-equipped, well-organized, savvy to social media, that has arisen there. And we've seen the detestable things that this group is doing to people of all kinds of ethnic persuasions in Iraq, and we understand the threat this is to Iraq and to the Middle East. And what we also know is that this is something that is affecting directly today, not just Iraq, but Syria, and there's really no border there. It's porous, and we actually know that ISIS headquarters is in Syria. And so this is an operation that can in no way be combined just to Iraq. You have to deal with this in Syria. So the president, hopefully tonight, while laying out what our national interest is, by laying out what his general strategy is, while laying out what his objectives certainly will talk about the fact that we have to deal with this in Syria. So I just want to say to our presiding officer, the President of the Senate, today, that it seems to me that even if the president feels that he has the authority to do this with his own constitutional powers under Article 2, even if he feels that, it is totally preposterous that he would not seek our authorization to take on a different enemy, and certainly to take this into another country that we have not been involved in this way in the past, Syria, to take operations on in that country with a different enemy and not come to Congress, to not seek the approval of the people that the people of this country have elected to weigh in on these matters, to me, again, is tremendously lacking in judgment. So, I want to close with this. Well, first of all, let me not close with this. One of the benefits of the president coming to seek our approval is that he has stated over the weekend that he believes this could take 3 years. Let me say this one more time. This is a conflict that he believes could take 3 years in duration and take us into another country where we're now not involved in this manner anyway. And he's talking about not coming to us. Now, I just want to say again, bad things happen in conflicts. Our presiding officer, who has a distinguished career serving our country, and I honor that, distinguished public servant in the military, knows that things don't always go the way that you intend. And so for the president to undertake something 3 years in duration, by his own words, in another country against an enemy that's one of the most well-funded terrorist operations we've dealt with, knowing that he has to pull together a coalition of people with very different interests, but with like interests relative to this particularly detestable group of folks, to think that this president would undertake that without Congress being behind him and having 535 Monday morning quarterbacks because there was never any buy-in by Congress, to me is foolish. But because of what happened a year ago, where our allies in the region who were going to help us deal with Assad were waiting by the telephone to respond, because they, with us, were going to conduct activities against Assad about 1 year ago today, because they watched on CNN that the president had changed his mind without even notifying them, without notifying their leaders or their armed services, there's a credibility issue. So I would say to the president, he's talked about building a coalition. He says that there are 12 countries that are already interested. I would say to him that coming to Congress would show that there's durability, that he has sought our support, that he has answered our questions, that his cabinet members have laid out their plan both in public and in private, talking about details that have no business in the public sphere, and that he has the buy-in of the United States Congress. And I would say to the other members of the coalition, the people in the region that question our durability, question candidly, I hate to say it, his credibility, they would say that after he had done that, they believe that this nation is unified in dealing with this issue. So I just want to say again, I hope the president is good tonight. I hope he delivers to the American people why this is in our national interest. I hope he lays out a strategy that makes sense. I hope he deals with the objectives that he wants to come forth with. Importantly to me, I understand how we're going to deal with the ground in Iraq. I understand we have an Iraqi military, as weak as they are, that we can build off of. I understand that we have the Peshmerga, the Kurds, who we can build off of and support. What I don't understand in Syria, especially since year after year we've done nothing to support the moderate opposition like we said we would do, or very little. Let me not say nothing, but very little. Since we really have nothing of substance on the ground in Syria, how are we going to deal with that? Our presiding officer knows more about military affairs than me by far. But how do you deal in a country with nothing on the ground? I want him to explain that. But I think all of us would like to understand that. But again, I think if he were to come here to seek our support overtly, and to explain to the presiding officer and myself and many others in this body how he has a strategy that could be effective, I believe that he would receive overwhelming support, and I believe he would have the durability necessary to deal with an enemy of this sort. So I do hope, again, I hope the president is on target tonight. I hope the president will seek our authorization for the use of military force now. I hear people say, by the way, well, gosh, Corker, it's right before an election. Right before an election. So here our president is going to talk to the nation about what we are going to be doing with this enemy in Iraq and Syria and candidly in other places. And because there's an election coming up, maybe he's not going to, I don't know that this is his reason, but I know there's a lot of people around here that say they don't want to deal with it before the election. Are you kidding me? The most significant decision that is made, and that is sending men and women in harm's way. And because it's 2 months before an election, there are people in this body that don't want to be put to the task by the president of asking for an AUMF, whether it's 2 hours, 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months, or 2 years before an election. You shouldn't serve in the United States Senate if you don't want to take up these issues and deal with them. So I hope the president will change his mind. And I hope the president will come here and seek our input and say that he wants an authorization and send us that authorization. That's what he did with Syria. Let us look at it. Let us deal with his cabinet members, both in public and private. Let us deal with him. Let us see his commitment. Let us understand the coalition that's being put forth. And let us deal with this in the manner that people who serve in the United States Senate should deal with it. But it should come only after the president seeks that authorization. That's an important thing for him to do. I hope he will do it tomorrow after giving this speech. And I stand by ready to work with him in that regard. And I close with those comments. I yield the floor.